This year, October 7th falls out during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva. The Rama writes that there is a minhag, both on Erev Rosh Hashanah and Erev Yom Kippur, to visit the graves of tzaddikim and our ancestors during this time. There are two main reasons for this minhag. One is that we believe that the merits of these holy people are conducive to our prayers being answered by Hashem. The second is that facing our mortality is key to doing tshuva. We are also approaching Yom Kippur, a day on which many families, like my wife, her parents, and siblings, will be saying Yizkor for the very first time. This week on Shark Tank, we have 3 short and very meaningful conversations. One with a father, one with a brother, and one with a friend. First, I spoke with my father-in-law, Simmy Zimbalist, about his son and my brother-in-law, Eli Moshe, Hashem Yikom Damo. We spoke about Eli Moshe's unique and lucrative business that he launched when he was around 13 years old. We also spoke about going back to work after a tragedy and about some business management lessons from Eli Moshe's notebook. Second, I spoke with Hillel Fuld, tech columnist and fierce Israel advocate, about his brother, Ari Fuld, Hashem Yikom Damo, who was killed in a terror attack 6 years ago this week. Finally, I spoke to my cousin, Avraham Rosner, who lost 2 close friends during the war, Yosef Guedalia and Binyamin Airley. I wanted to know what it's like for soldiers to stare death in the face and how to cope with loss in the midst of intense combat. Before we begin this week's episode, I would like to wish all of the Shark Tank listeners and all of Klal Yisrael a Gmar Chatima Tova. May we be blessed with a year of bracha and hatzlacha. And now, here are our conversations, remembering Eli Moshe Zimbalist, Ari Fuld, Yosef Guedalia, and Binyamin Airley. Normally, when we talk about soldiers who were killed during their mandatory service as Chayalei Sadir, so we're talking about young men between the ages of 18 and 21, and almost all of them were before they had any sort of career. But with regards to Eli Moshe, at a very young age, he'd already built a very impressive career in building. So Abba, maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about the origins of Eli Moshe's love and passion for building, and can you describe the scope of his work, even though he was very, very young?
When Eli Moshe was around 10 years old, we quickly noticed that he had golden hands and he was really got into woodworking. It started off by building small things like stenders and little bookcases, and even, was really good for him to, quick and easy for him to build IKEA furniture. But shortly after that, and through a closer relationship that he went to a woodworking club with someone named Ari Fuld, where initially he was a student in the woodworking club, and quickly Aryeh saw that his skills levels was much, much higher than the other students. He actually asked him to co-lead this woodworking club. And then from there, it really exponentially grew. He built his first pergola with, those wooden sukkahs that many people have on their in their homes, on their decks, on their mirpesets, and started doing it, and initially did it for our home, and then he built dozens of them over the years, and also built decks and other woodworking, and taking on very, very large, tens of thousands of shekel projects. For some people, when COVID hit, and it was, especially when he was in 11, being as a teenager, being trapped at home could be very challenging. For him, it actually even to further help grow his business, as many people, wanting to spend more time outdoors in the fresh air and with concerns of catching the coronavirus. So tons and tons of people were asking him to do all kinds of these large projects in Beit Shemesh and Ramat Beit Shemesh primarily. And he started ordering large supplies and having trucks delivering wood and painting. And he started hiring workers and building them for many, many homes. And because there was a lot of time where class was on Zoom, sometimes he was, building while on Zoom. As he had a very, very good memory, he could listen to the teacher on Zoom with the camera off while holding a drill and a saw in his hands. And every once in a while, he got caught when the mic on his Zoom all of a sudden got turned off, and the teacher heard some drilling noises in the background. And then he would ask him some questions, and he always seemed to be on top of the materials that they were learning. So that's where it kind of all got started.
Did he ever reflect on the uniqueness of his journey? Most people in our community end up in white-collar jobs where you sit in a desk with a computer, and his path was quite different. So did he ever talk about that?
A few things that I think would be important to mention. One, so although, in the early part of his career, he was hands-on and he felt very strongly that in order to be able to run a business, you need to be able to have the know-how to manage others. But although the business itself, like you said, was, blue-collar type of work, but he was really looking to become a building engineer and run the business itself in addition to being able to be hands-on and direct others. He had already, as I mentioned, started hiring employees and he was, very much into the business aspect of it. And even with the money that he made, he at a young age already started investing in it, a Baytov trade account as he was trying to explore the stock market. But he didn't feel, especially in Israel, but there's religious Jews that are bankers, lawyers, doctors, and they're also garbage men and street cleaners. He felt there was a proper profession and had no shame, of being wanting to be being a builder. And he saw other Jews that were interested in working in this profession as a builder. The other thing I was just going to kind of reflect on, which he prioritized, he went after he finished high school in Yeshivat Ava Yisrael, so he went to Yeshivat Shalavim in the Hesder program. And when he joined the Hesder program, although he had many opportunities that came his way, he really prioritized himself. When he was in yeshiva, he wanted to be in yeshiva, even he passed up on many, many jobs, as much as sometimes, like he would share with me his, disappointment of passing up on tens of thousands of shekel to do a project, but he really wanted to prioritize his learning while he was in yeshiva, and he felt that when he's done with yeshiva, with being, in the army, in Tzahal, then and then go back to yeshiva, then he'll, have plenty of time and years to build and to make money. So he really prioritized his learning while he was in yeshiva, and put his building only during his free time, but didn't want that to take an impact on his learning. The one thing that he did do while he was in yeshiva, as most yeshivas have, they have like a lunch and a break in the afternoon after our morning seder before mincha, and so because he had this entrepreneurial mindset, he was always thinking ahead. So he decided he wanted to get a truck driver's license in addition to his regular driver's license. So he had to learn how to drive stick and learn how to drive a truck. So he found in Modi'in, which is just a short drive away from where Yeshivat Shalavim is located in Novi Alon, a truck driving school. And so he, during his break, managed to take driving lessons and got his truck driver's license so he could buy a large pickup truck at some point. He had his dream to have the Ford 250 Raptor was his dream car that he used to load all of his supplies in the back at some point in his career.
So I could think of two possible reactions to that. Someone could be listening to this and think, wow, what a tragedy that someone with so many dreams and aspirations and plans for after yeshiva will never be able to get to that point. The other way to think about it is that he had his priorities and he prioritized yeshiva, and given the fact that we realize now his time was limited, he allocated that time in the optimal way that aligned with his values. Is that something that you or any other family members have reflected on, the fact that he had all these plans but never got around to them?
We have, but again, I think that we're very proud of, of how he prioritized things. I mean, I think he had a good head on his shoulders, and how he looked at his outlook in life, what he prioritized, and when he was in yeshiva, he was in yeshiva. When he was in the army, he was in the army, and he knew that he had that was Ratzon Hashem at that point in time in his life, to fulfill certain missions. And so, and I think he was very good at creating that balance. He had a good balance between, even though he worked himself very hard always, like that was just how his personality was. He could come home from the army after long days in the many hours of not sleeping, and he always made it to minyan on time. He always made time to learn or to do Shtayim Mikra. When he was in yeshiva, he made time to spend time with his friends. Even though he never missed things. He was very much makbid about, he had his schedules, time for friends, time for work, time for learning, time for the army. And obviously the balance changed at different stages in his life. But he always was prioritizing right, at that moment in time.
And just to tie that into something you said earlier, because you said that he had a bit of a unique path in his career towards being a builder, and the fact that he also had his head on his shoulders and his priorities straight. So we can tie this together and think about his relationship to Talmud Torah. He obviously loved Torah on the one hand. On the other hand, he had some serious challenges with regards to learning that forced him to forge his own unique path. So maybe you could talk a little bit and explain to our listeners exactly what that was like for him, what the challenges were, and how he found his unique path to overcoming them.
So he was diagnosed when he was young with some form of dyslexia. So that made it very hard, especially learning things like Gemara, where there's lots of text in it. So many things that were rich in text made it more challenging. Baruch Hashem, he was blessed with a almost quasi-photographic type memory from an auditory perspective, that when he heard things, he almost never forgot them. So although he had this learning disability, and obviously the reading skills are a very important skill in one's life, and he made a lot of efforts to practice through various tutors and various programs to improve that as much as he could. But he was really gifted with his memory, that it didn't hold him back in his learning in any way. As long as he was listening to the Rav giving the shiur, he remembered the Gemara, he remembered the Rashi, he remembered the Tosfos, and similarly with Chavruta, even it was interesting, we just in hearing various friends of his from yeshiva, even they had some of the challenges, he never was shied away from volunteering to be, to read texts and during different classes, never shied away from being a chazan or anything of that nature. He was active gabbai both in yeshiva and in the army, and so in a lot of ways, he just pushed himself in these areas and succeeded in them. So it never really discouraged him in any way.
And that reminds me of a conversation I had with him. Many guys who do Hesder, they join the army in March, and usually their enlistment comes out between Purim and Pesach. And oftentimes they run into the issue that the army's policy is that they kasher the kitchens a few days before, and they serve matzah 3 or 4 days before Pesach, including Erev Pesach. That's the army's policy, because otherwise it would be impossible. Such a large-scale operation doesn't make sense otherwise. And Eli Moshe told me, what do you mean I'm going to eat matzah on Erev Pesach? I'll figure something out. But he wouldn't even think about being mekel on this area of halacha, which is not the most serious, and there is a minhag hamakom aspect to allow these things to take place and to work. But he stood by his values very, very strongly. He was very, very machmir and medactic, even in more challenging situations. And that is something that we found out afterwards even more about. So you can tell us a little more about how careful he was with halacha and some of the stories we found out afterwards about the different questions that he asked.
So we heard some of the halachic dilemmas he shared with me, and he actually consulted many times with his Rosh Yeshiva or his Ramim in Shalavim. I'll just give you a few examples of some of the areas where those dilemmas came up, and it again really demonstrates his Yiras Shamayim. And even one or two of them, the Rosh Yeshiva of Shalavim actually developed a shir klali around some of the shilas that he had asked. One of the shilas that came up was, for example, he was on a base, and there's not air conditionings in the rooms, and the only place where there is air conditioning was in the Beit Knesset. So he asked his Rav, can I go into the Beit Knesset just to cool off? Not during davening times, because it's very hot, and there's no air conditioning. Or another question that came up was that he's on he had a doctor's appointment on a Sunday, and he had permission to leave to go back, but if he left for the appointment on Sunday, he was in Aza at the time, they were going to have to take him on a shuttle from Aza back to his base in Zikim on Shabbos in order that he could get out on Sunday. So if it's not for Sorchei Shabbos, can you leave the base? Can you leave Aza on Shabbos when it's not really for Sorach on Shabbos? Supposed to when you're obviously fighting, there's different Sorachim that come up. Or another, he was that famous big success of Tzahal when they were in when they came back a second time to the Shifa hospital in Gaza, and so that was around Purim time, and for Purim, he made sure to send me money to give to Matanos Lavionim via bit before he went in, and then there was Tadit Esther, where it was a very hot day. Luckily, he really probably didn't have to fast, but he wanted to fast on that. And I was talking with one of his friends. He said he happened to call me that day. He said, "Oh, I'm fasting. It's not a big deal." And I asked his friend about it. He's like, "Not a big deal. It was hot. We were working on the vehicles. Most of us didn't fast, but he insisted on fasting. He was always makbid to daven. Most of the time they weren't able to have minyanim, but daven and daven bizan. Even if you may have been pater from a halachic perspective, he always made after the daven with his tefillin, bisman whenever possible. So many stories like that we heard, which is really amazing. Where even if sometimes halachically things were permitted, he was really makbid wherever he could to be shomer Torah mitzvahs, even very challenging circumstances.
Chazal say that when two people part from each other, they're supposed to do it mitoch dvar halacha. They're supposed to have parting words of Torah to remember each other from the Torah that they last learned together. And I don't remember the exact last conversation I had with Eli Moshe, but certainly one of the final conversations on that last Shabbos that we spent together is he was telling me about the sugya of biza, what type of looting and stuff you're allowed to take and not allowed to take according to the army policy, according to different halachic shitas, and that is certainly a conversation and a halachic discussion that I will never ever forget. I want to transition a little bit and to wrap up, talk about your experience as a father and a professional and going back to work after the awful tragedy. And I could think of going back to work in one of two ways. It could, on the one hand, be a healthy sense of distraction or diversion to have something else to focus your energies on, and that could be very good. On the other hand, I could see it as being a very big challenge, trying to think about like what's the meaning of all this and not finding any fulfillment in your work because your perspective on things have totally changed. So can you tell us a little bit about what that was like for you going back to work after Eli Moshe's Shiva?
Sure, Yaakov. So I'll start off with after Shiva, so I, was seeking advice. So I spoke to other families that have gone through similar circumstances and also spoke to some professionals. So the advice that they had given me, was one of the things was, especially I was asking both for myself, but also for my children and grandchildren. And they said that you should look out for what they called red flags. If someone's not sleeping, not eating, they're not leaving their bed, they're not getting back to their normal routines. Those are all kind of red flags where you really need to get immediate help, as opposed to if people, obviously there's going to be going through a tragedy, having significant loss, being sad, crying at times are certainly normal reactions, but certainly people are not able to continue in their regular lives at all, then that's something to be concerned about. And so one of the things that I thought was important for all of us was trying to get back to our regular routines. And so it happened that when Shiva was over, it's the Chofish HaGadol in Israel, the middle of the summer. So the kids didn't have as much routine in general but at least for myself, I was able to go back to work. And I think it was helpful getting back to normal routines of work, and contributing and as you said, a bit, at least what was a distraction, but at least have other things on my mind as opposed to just having Eli Moshe on my mind all the time. And so I think that was helpful. Although initially one of our kids even mentioned this, the kind of the fear of going back to work, because it was a bit of a same way how like with all the people with good intentions, but as you go back to work, you're re-greeting everybody or greeting them for the first time after going through this tremendous loss. So a lot of people are coming and as someone said, they don't even sometimes know they all want to say something. They don't know what to say. Sometimes they're saying some things that are stupid, etc. But it's a bit of like revisiting of the Shiva to a certain degree again, which made it challenging. But after the initial interactions, it passed. But but then there are times when some employees are doing some silly or stupid things, and I do ask myself, in the scheme of life, this is so unimportant, and this is what they're thinking about, But I realize that life has to go on, and there are, not everyone, has the same perspectives, but it certainly were moments where I scratched my head, like, why are we dealing with this? It's so trivial and compared to the real important things in life.
And you had shared with me offline that you were speaking to some professionals and to some other fathers who have gone through loss during this war, and they spoke about the importance of public speaking. Now, you and Ima are very much into helping others and being part of the klal, but in a very private way, and you transitioned to a more public face. So can you tell us a little bit more about what that was like and why it's important?
Initially shied away, as especially during Shiva, even various news channels, and I know you were our PR representative during the Shiva, which we much appreciated. But the news channels wanted to interview us, and various other organizations wanted to interview us or be menachem us in various ways. And initially, I shied away, what is their benefit? I don't need to be their news item. But then I realized two things. One, in fact, there is an opportunity to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim, and truly do believe that Eli Moshe and legacy that he left behind, he was really a special individual, and he can really, truly, some of the things he's done can really inspire others. I think there was a real opportunity to inspire others, even though I didn't think of that in that way initially. And secondly, as much as it, and I'm not a psychologist, I don't specialize in mental health as your mother does, but I think that there is a therapeutic aspect of talking about one's loss and about attributes of that individual. And I think that in different forms that you speak about it, especially when you realize that you can influence other people by sharing some of these stories and helping to connect them to things they may not have been connected to otherwise. And whether it's speaking in front of students that are here for camps, seminaries, yeshivas, shuls, podcasts, alumni dinners, or in front of yeshivas. We've spoken in front of small groups to groups of hundreds of people in different capacities or in different podcasts, and each one has, and we've seen the responses from people. And I truly believe that there is a positive influence, and I think that positive influence and the fact that we're talking about it is good for us and for others. And I think that there's so I do recommend doing it, and I've heard that from others as well. Some people are less comfortable speaking in public forums, and if that's the case, whether they be small forums or big forums, they may be uncomfortable, but there's other ways of communication these days, whether it's WhatsApp groups or blogs or various articles that one could write that can also be ways to share about their family and their loss and what they're going through. And I think that it can be very positive outlet for them.
And Eli Moshe was similar to Moshe Rabbeinu in that he was not an ish darim. He was not a person of words. He was a man of action. He got stuff done. He did stuff quietly. But he did leave us a few words. He left us a notebook with some things scribbled down. We had to decipher it. His handwriting was not so good, and we're not even sure to this day what the context of those of that list was. But he left us a list of 10 things, and you've used some of those things in your talks and your public speaking, and used his own words as a source of inspiration for others. And maybe you could share with our listeners who are Bnei Torah in the workforce one piece of advice, one piece of perspective that Eli Moshe left in his notebook that are relevant to their careers and their business lives.
So with your permission, Yaakov, I want to give two. One is one of the items that so on this list that we found in his notebook in his room, one of the items was, in Hebrew, was written, Zahot Mitzukah Eitzel Acherim. So it's, I think both in the professional and in the personal life, when we are identifying others that are in distress and working, in the end of the day, at every company that you're managing people, and people go through, whether it be work stress or personal stress that impacts the workplace. I think as managers that are managing people, you're identifying employees that are distressed from work and can help them get through those things. But I think that's an important way to be a Ben Torah in the workplace, where you're not only giving tasks and completing tasks, but actually helping to mentor people to get through things. And the second one, which I think can have a double meaning in this context, was L'Lmod Mashu Kol Yom. It was to learn something every day. So I think that I believe Eli Moshe really had in mind learning Torah. And that even no matter whether you're in the army, in the workforce, or elsewhere, Kovei Itim B'Torah every day, to learn something every day, whether it be big or small, depending on how much time one can work into their schedules and how busy they are. but to always make sure to learn something, to really define time for learning Torah every day. But I'll add to that, in addition to the pashut, aspect of it, in terms of learning something from a Torah perspective every day, I think that in one's workplace, there's also opportunities to learn new things, work skills every day as well. And I think that one doesn't have to learn the biggest, most innovative thing every day. You don't have to come up with a new startup every day, but even one little thing every day that one is learning, whether it's the technical skills or the managerial skills, I think that's something that will add to one's job satisfaction, knowing that every day you learned something that you didn't know yesterday. It goes in baby steps, but I think that there's a lot of benefit as in professionals to learn something new every day in the workplace, in addition to learning Torah every day.
Thank you for those beautiful messages, and hopefully this coming year will bring us and our family and all of Klal Yisrael brachos and only good news.
Amen. Thank you, Yaakov. Is that to all the listeners, and Shana Tova with a lot of safety and happiness to all.
Hillel Fuld, welcome to Shark Tank. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Love the name, Shark Tank. It's a great one.
So we're recording the special pre-Yom Kippur episode where we get ready to go into Shul and say Yizkor and remember all the loved ones we've lost. And it's also the time of year where you remember the yortzeit of Ari Fuld, Hashem Yikom Damo. So Hillel, maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about what it was like growing up with Ari. What was your age difference? What was your relationship like? What type of things do you guys like to do growing up together?
Yeah, so we're 5 boys. Me and Ari, I guess, were the closest in age. We grew up in the same house, meaning my older brothers were already out and married. Ari was he was like the class clown, He had his karate, he had his hockey that he was into, and he was a big dude, and he used that energy to do incredible things. But as a kid, he was like a typical troublemaker,
Yeah. The first I actually heard of him was as a karate teacher. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? He was I think a 4th degree black belt. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. How did he get into it? What do you think about karate that really touched him so much and connected with him so much?
I mean, yeah, he was into karate since I can remember, basically since he was a little kid. Very, very dedicated to it, and yeah, he was a 4th degree black belt. His sensei, his teacher, was the man who basically invented the type of karate that he became an expert in. And it was one of his biggest passions. I don't know if you're asking me from like a psychological perspective of what drew him, I'm not sure, but I think it was one of many ways he channeled his energy. He had a lot of, I would say, an extraordinary amount of energy, which he channeled to karate, he channeled to fighting for Israel, he channeled for the Torah and many of the good things that he became very well known for. But karate was definitely one of them.
And I once heard you give a very beautiful description of how his karate and the mindset that he was able to develop there influenced his tefillah. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, for sure. When most people pray, most people daven, they shuckle. I don't know when that became a thing, but that's what we do. Ari didn't shuckle. Ari would put himself in a state of Tai Chi meditation, and he was just somewhere else. Just that intensity, and you're literally standing before God in a very real sense. That's how Ari davened. He was just very, very deep in a meditative state that I have not seen since on anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that a lot because I really struggle with focus and concentration and all of the distractions that we have around us. So the fact that he was able to be such an energetic person, but also be disciplined enough to control his focus and his presence to really be in front of Kadosh Baruch Hu is something very, very inspiring and something which I try to implement in a tiny, tiny way in my life. So we're recording this. It's crazy to think that it's been 6 years since Ari was murdered and he died a hero's death, saving a bunch of lives in the process. And I wanted to focus on that angle specifically, meaning there are so many projects that you guys as a family and friends have done to make sure that Ari, even though he was physically killed, but his spirit and his soul and everything he stood for continues very, very strong. So can you tell us a little bit about some of those main projects?
When he was born, I guess now we're talking about 50 years ago, my parents named him Ari. Ari was not a very common name. Many people called their kids Ari, but as a shortcut for Aryeh, which means lion, right? But Ari was not a very common name. And many people asked my parents, where did you get that name from? And they were like, we like the name, too much thought put into it. But then Ari started to grow up. And as he became an adult, there were some things about him that were, I guess, extraordinary is a way to I guess, to coin them or to give them a description. But it was more than that. It was, I don't know. It was maybe even supernatural. I don't know what you want to call it, but certain things that he was fiery passionate about. And For starters, Ari came to Israel before we came by himself. He just picked up and moved to Israel and, volunteered for the IDF, climbed up the ranks of the IDF, continued to volunteer in reserves duty, and he got his exemption, and he ripped up those papers and continued to volunteer. Like, he was a real warrior. Like, there's no other way to describe. He was a warrior who conquered this land. That was what he was. That's one. Two, I would wake up, in the middle of the night, and he'd be arguing with some anti-Semite on Facebook, and I'd be like, "What? Go to sleep. Like, this guy's not even listening to you. What are you even wasting your time for?" And that was not like on his radar. Like, sleep? What do you mean? I need to defend Israel. And he just didn't sleep. Like, I don't know when he slept. He was just on all day, every day. That's two. Three, he was obviously a deeply religious person, but there were certain things, certain commandments that he just took way more seriously. Prayer is one of them that we just said. Another thing that he was very, very passionate about was tzitzis, the mitzvah, the commandment of, wearing fringes on a four-cornered garment. He had an ongoing debate with Rav Nebenzahl, I think it was, about tcheles or not tcheles. He was very passionate. Like, all the pictures on Facebook are with him and the talis on his head. He was very, very passionate about tzitzis. And finally, if you talk about, prayer, he was very passionate about a specific prayer, which is Shema Yisrael, right? Hear, O Israel, Hashem is God, Hashem is one. And again, there are videos of him, I would say characterized Ari. So just before I read you these psukim, which will blow your mind, let's just go over what we just said, right? We said he was a warrior who conquered the land, like legitimately conquered the land. He didn't sleep. He was super passionate about prayer, about tzitzis, and about Shema, right? So the word Ari, which means lion, appears twice in the entire Torah. The first one, I'm reading the pasuk, the verse, and then I'll translate. Karash achav ke'ari, uchelavi mi'ikimenu mevarechacha baruch v'arecha arur. I'm reading the translation. They crouch, they lie down like a lion, Ari, like the king of beasts. Who dare arouse them? Blessed are they who bless you. Accursed they who curse you. That's the verse, right? Karash achav ke'ari. Now, Rashi, famous commentator on the Torah, has a duty, has a job, which is to define that term. What is an Ari? What is a lion? Now, if I said to you, define a lion, you would say, I don't know, the king of beasts. You'd say the strongest animal. You'd say many different things that you can say about a lion. But Rashi doesn't say any of that. And I'm reading word for word. Karash achav ke'ari, lay down like a lion. Kitargumo, Rashi says, just like Onkelos, another commentator on the Torah. What is a lion? Yityashvu be'artzam bekoach u'vikvura. They will settle their land in strength and might. That is how Rashi explains and defines the word lion. They will settle their land with strength and might. Like, that's a nice coincidence that that's what Ari did. But the second one's even crazier. The pasuk says, Hein am kilavi akum, lo, a people that rises like a lion, v'cha'arit nasa, leaps up like the king of beasts, lo yishkav ad yochal teref, rests not till it has feast on prey and drunk the blood of the slain. Meaning, a lion does not sleep until it consumes its prey. Okay, so he doesn't sleep. Okay, so we have a man who is a warrior and conquered the land with strength and might, and then we have a man who doesn't sleep. And now is the real kicker. Rashi on that pasuk, on that second verse, and this is just bananas. There's no way to explain this. It says, in the morning, they overcome their, Yetzer Hara, their evil inclination, like a lion, as in strong, to grab the mitzvos, to grab the commandments. Now, how many mitzvos are there in the Torah? 613. Rashi could have given any of those as an example. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not, whatever. What does Rashi say? And I'm reading word for word. In the morning, 3 mitzvos. Livosh talit, to wear the fringes. Likro et shema, to read the shema. Ulaniach tefillin, to wear the tefillin and pray. And my parents were like, what the heck just happened? Like, twice in the Torah it mentions the word Ari, and both times it is literally his biography. It is his life story. And that is just, it's mind-boggling, right? And so Ari, he led a very extraordinary life. He fought all day for his people and his land and his God. And in his last moment, everyone knows he ran after the terrorists and shot him literally seconds before he dropped dead. And yeah, he became a national hero of the state of Israel. And he lived larger than life and died larger than life.
And how do you guys as a family, you guys have done all these projects. So what has been the focus and the strategy in keeping his legacy alive?
Yeah, it's the things that were important to him, right? Obviously, his shul in Efrat, where he, had all his friends and his community, so that's important that we're building that. His life was dedicated to IDF soldiers. Ari was very well known for going base to base with like ice cream and ices and just giving the soldiers, food and drink or whatever when they needed it. And so to commemorate Ari, actually one of my closest friends, Donnie Haller, the Haller family in the U.S., along with other people, donated a food truck that's basically drives base to base and just gives soldiers, again, ices, ice cream, whatever they need. And it says, obviously in his memory on the truck. But, arifuld.org is the organization that, is a funnel to people who want to support Israel and the IDF. Arifuld.org is the organization that they donate to, and that money is then given directly to answer the needs of IDF soldiers.
And what advice would you have to some of the families who are fresh off of their mourning and they want to make sure that long-term the legacy of their loved ones is perpetuated? What type of things have you learned throughout this process?
So without getting political, obviously at the Shiva, many of the politicians came to my parents' house, just to pay their respects, I guess. And Netanyahu came. And, Netanyahu lost his brother, obviously, in Entebbe. And so he came not as the prime minister, but I think he came as someone who lost his brother. And he said to me, we weren't smart enough to write a book about my brother and remember all the stories because the stories were, endless. He said, don't make that mistake. Write a book. These stories about Ari are unbelievable. Write a book. There have been many books written about him, but, I think I, on a daily basis, ask myself, UWAD, what would Ari do, right? When I have a conflict online, respond, engage, don't respond, don't engage, what would Ari do? And so, my work, I feel like I'm carrying out or carrying on his legacy, but it's the amount of Sifrei Torah that were written and donated in his name, mikvahs and shuls, and it's literally endless. I mean, we're talking, I don't know the number, but I mean, I'm getting pictures from people on a very regular basis. They're davening in some shul and they send me a picture of, a plaque that says in memory of Ari Fuld. And so there are a lot of amazing things happening around the world in Ari's name.
You mentioned the Shiva. I remember it was quite a crazy scene. Ari was murdered on the 7th of Tishrei, which means that for Shiva, you had the 8th of Tishrei and the 9th of Tishrei, Erev Yom Kippur, and then you went into Yom Kippur. And not only did you have a very short Shiva, which means you didn't have as much time to necessarily sit and process, but the lines were around the block, and you didn't really have as much time to speak on a deep level with the people who were coming to visit you. It was really quick, unless you were Bibi. You were having a quick few minutes with Hillel and the family. Do you have any recollections? What you remember feeling at Yom Kippur? We're releasing this episode before Yom Kippur. I'm sure it was the craziest Yom Kippur of your life. So do you remember what some of the things that were going through your mind coming off of that awful week?
So I don't think I've ever spoken about this publicly, but I always, pretty much every single year of my life, I was first in shul on Yom Kippur, and I did Tefillah Zaka. Like I'm in shul, 40 minutes before Yom Kippur starts. There's like one or two people that join me there, but it's people start pouring in 40 minutes later. I don't know. I can't explain it to you. It's just Tefillah Zaka always spoke to me. And yeah, I remember that year. I remember where I was sitting in the shul, and I was reading Tefillah Zaka and just breaking down, just completely broke down, in tears. And I don't remember what I was saying to God, but I would imagine I was saying to God, like, what the actual heck? Like, what do you want from me? Like, are you kidding me right now? Here's a guy who dedicated his entire life to you and your people. What the actual heck? So yeah, that was definitely a very, very emotional Yom Kippur. And yeah, when you have a Shiva that's instead of 7 days, 2 days, it's all kind of, scrunched up into those 2 days. It's obviously way, way more intense. So those were definitely very intense days.
Yeah, and this Yom Kippur during Yizkor in Nofel Shemesh, where you daven and my in-laws daven, there will be a new family joining for the Yizkor prayers, the Zimbalist family. We'll remember also in this episode, Eli Moshe. And you also had a great relationship with Eli Mo. So can you just give us that angle on what it was like to be a customer of the 16-year-old who built pergolas and decks?
Yeah, so let me just give a little introduction and say that yesterday was 21 years since Dr. Applebaum was murdered with his daughter Nava. I was in Teaneck, New Jersey when that happened, and I remember turning on the news. And now, Dr. Applebaum, I am very good friends with his kids, Natan and Yitz, but he used to come to KBY where I was learning, where you're learning, and every Wednesday and learn with his kids, and I would often go back to Jerusalem with him. So I had a lot of alone time with him. I got to know the guy both as a tremendous Talmid Chacham, like off the charts, but also as a obviously incredible, brilliant doctor. And so I would say I was pretty close with him. And when I read that news, I completely broke down. I don't think I've ever cried before that day as much as I cried that day. My wife said it's the first time she ever saw me cry. That held the record until Ari. And then I was the only brother who didn't speak at the funeral. That's a whole different discussion. But you can watch the funeral. I was just a complete mess. I couldn't speak if I wanted to. And so, those are the first two times that I remember losing someone just absolutely gutted me. And the third time was Eli Moshe. I was at home. Shabbos had just ended, and we were reading the horrible news from Gaza. I think there was 8 soldiers killed or whatever the number was. And I was just lying in my bed, sad about what had happened, but kind of consciously, maybe as horrible as this might sound, thanking God that it's no one that I knew. And then my son, Avia, my 18-year-old, called me right away. I heard there was something wrong in his voice, and he said, "Did you hear?" I said, "What?" He goes, "Eli Moshe niftar. Eli Moshe died." And I'm like, "What? Like what? Just like what? Come again?" Like I didn't register with at all. And then I made the connection, and I'm like, "Oh my God!" And my wife is downstairs, and I called her and told her, and she screamed like at the top of her lungs. I mean, so those 3 things I think are for me, where I really broke down. Eli Moshe, everyone, he was like, everyone knew him in the neighborhood because he was just a good kid. He was just a straight up good kid. It's kind of one of those people that you wonder, like, what's the catch? You know what I mean? Like, he's just a good guy. He's good looking. He's smart. He's friendly. He's menschlich. He's talented as heck. And so, yeah, he was well known for building things in the neighborhood. And I can tell you that for years, we would put up our sukkah, and it would just be such a pain. And we were like, we have this backyard. Why don't we build a pergola? And it'll be easy. And of course, Eli Moshe came and took us off, like sweating in the hot Beit Shemesh sun, building it for us, never once complained about anything. And really what sticks out is his last interaction with us, which is that he was obviously in Gaza and he wasn't able to come to build our pergola or to help us complete the schach and everything we needed for our sukkah. No one expected him to call us. He's in Gaza, we know that. But he called and he said, I can't come this year. Can I get someone else to come instead of me? We're like, who is this person? So, he was a really, really special kid. And, I can't say I was super close with him. If I could do it again, I probably would be, because I'm sure I could learn a ton from him. But he was just one of those guys that was just positive energy to be around. And he just exuded like good vibes and good energy, and everyone loved him. That's really the bottom line. And, in high school, one of my closest friends, I went to his uncle's like kever, and I was at his yard site, and his mom, I remember saying this, and I have the worst memory, but somehow this stuck with me. She said, my brother, was one of the good ones, and Hashem wants the good ones to sit by his kisei hakavod. I remember in high school thinking to myself, that's a little bit of a weird thing to say. But as I grew older and as I see the people that we're losing, it's all the good ones. And it seems to me that there is some truth to that. Hashem wants the good ones by him. So that very much applies to Eli Moshe.
Wow. And last question for today. You mentioned that great acronym of WWAD. What would Ari do? And I want to ask you one of those questions because in my mind, looking outside now, on the one hand, the Jewish people have shown incredible strength, resilience, unity at times. On the other hand, let's be very honest. We are wounded. We are traumatized. We are hurting. There are still hostages in Gaza. There are still people evacuated from the north. And the division that we saw before the war seems to be back, maybe in full force. The scale doesn't really matter, but it's definitely still there. So I'm wondering if you could give us a WWAD, what your thoughts are on what Ari would give us as perspective and chizuk during the moment that we find ourselves right now.
Yeah, it's very clear what he would do. I mean, it's what I've been doing the entire war, which is we're deep in it. We're devastated. We're mourning. We're PTSD, whatever you want to call it. We are. Okay, that's a standalone statement that is not negated by what I'm about to say. Purim. Like, what is Purim? One of the happiest days of the year, right? We celebrate. We dance. We drink. We eat. We get dressed up. What was Purim? What was Purim? Purim was infinitely darker than October 7th. Purim was the leader of the world, 127 countries agreeing to annihilate us. That was it. We were finished. We know IDF. We were done. What was Hanukkah? We were done. We were not winning that war. What was Pesach? 210 years of backbreaking slavery. These times were incredibly dark in our history. And here we are celebrating. But if I told you then we would celebrate, you would have said you're nuts. And so we're in it. And so therefore we can't imagine it because it's so deep and so dark. But Ari would guarantee, not even a question, he would be walking around with a big bumper sticker on his head saying, we will dance again. That would be his message. And, and Am Yisrael Chai, I always say, like, Am Yisrael Chai is a nice Karlbach song, but it's also a historical reality, right? We're here. We're the Babylonians, right? That's what he would be talking about. He'd say, I'm going to the base to go hug some soldiers, to go bring them food, but I'm going to relay the message to everyone I speak to that Am Yisrael Chai and we will dance again.
That is a beautiful message, and I appreciate the fact that you made the connection between Purim and Kippurim, and remember that those two holidays are very deeply linked. And Bezrat Hashem, we should be zoche to dance again with Ari and with Eli Moshe and with all the other holy souls who we will remember on this Yom Kippur. Hillel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
Okay, Avraham Rosner, my dear cousin, welcome to Stark Tank, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So you have lost a number of people who you know throughout the war. We're going to talk specifically about two people you had a closer relationship with. And let's start with Yosef Guedalia, who you knew for a very long time. So tell us a little bit about Yosef, who he was as a person, and what your relationship with him was like.
Yosef basically went to school with me from when I made Aliyah in like 3rd grade. And we basically went to school together all through high school. So it's like almost 10 years together. And also in basketball together on the same team. So spent a lot of time together. And basically we're just good friends. Even after that, when he went to China and Airley and I went to Yeshiva in Yerucham, we kept in touch and we would meet up on Shabbatot. And then later when we both went to the army, so also we would talk here and there, and we didn't see each other as much, but we kept in touch. Yosef was like just an all-around good person, always looking to be good and do the right thing. He was very self-disciplined. From a very young age, he would do the things he wanted to do and not do the things he didn't want to do. And he had like this quiet leadership to him, where he was just like not loud, but always like a leader and always doing whatever needed to be done quietly without making a big amount of noise. And just always a very fun and special person to be around.
And what do we know about the circumstances under which he was killed?
Well, it was on October 7th. Yosef, without getting like a specific Kuda command, he went down to the south and basically just did whatever he could, saving as many people as he could, and was killed sometime during that afternoon.
Where was he?
He was in Kfar Aza, which is like a yishuv in the outskirts of Gaza. There was many mechablim that were there trying to kill as many people as they could. And Yosef was one of the first responders who got there. And him and his friends were able to save people with the jeep that they used and get them out as many as they were able to. And I think it's also part of who he was as a person and as a important job in the army. It wasn't his first time on Shabbat going to the army. He would go like almost every time he was home. He would some night go and do a bilut in the army and go do some important mission, and it was very much like part of his regular day-to-day thing. It wasn't something unique that he went on Shabbat, but of course the fact that there was so many terrorists around didn't stop him from thinking about it for a second.
And with regards to Binyamin Airley, what about him? Did you know him before the army or just in the army?
Binyamin I didn't really know before the army. He was my soldier when I became an officer. So my first job as an officer was when I met him, which was about a year before the war. So that's when we started advanced training together. And from there, I was with him for about a year straight. But that year was very intense in terms of the time together. We were together almost the entire year, like every Chag, every weekend, it was always spent together. And the fact that he's from Beit Shemesh also, like, the families knew each other, so it made us feel a little closer.
And what do we know about the circumstances under which he was killed?
Binyamin was actually under my command when he was killed, so I know a lot more about the situation itself. But in general, it was in Gaza, there was a certain unit with us that was basically in a itakrut with terrorists, and as soon as we heard it on the walkie, so we ran there, and part of the going to the house and getting rid of the terrorists. So Binyamin was one of the first people who went in, and he was killed when he was doing that. But that was really like you could see how it didn't fear him, it didn't faze him at all. The fact that we knew there was live terrorists, there was already people who were injured, and he was just doing whatever he had to do to be the best soldier he could. And I think also just the Voila of Binyamin was firsthand, and so afterwards how we dealt with the unit had a lot to do with who Binyamin was and how he was killed.
Wow. So you have, on the one hand, like a very close childhood friend who you knew for a very long time. And then you have a soldier who's under your command who, in a certain sense, the relationship is almost like a father-son relationship. And you lose these two dear people in your life. And both of those times you were in the middle of very intense combat. You know, in the week after October 7th, you were part of the units that were continuing to scan the area and make sure everything was clear. You know, when you lost Binyamin in Gaza, you didn't have the luxury of going home and sitting Shiva and processing things. So what was that like for you?
So first of all, it was hard. I remember, like, when I found out Yosef was killed, I was in the middle of a mission and I couldn't really, like, think about it. I was just, like, in a whole, like, ocean of emotions. I didn't really know how to understand what happened. And Binyamin was about a few weeks later, so that was already after we had gone through some sort of death, but this was much closer, and obviously being part of us. And it's not the same when it's someone who you sit with for 3 hours on Shmila, like 2 hours before he's killed. But I think one of the biggest tovanot I had was that there will be a time for this, and right now we have more important things to do, not because these things are not important, but these are things that we're going to have to do afterwards because we have missions to do. And of course, the people who were killed, that's what they would want from us, and that was part of it. It happens to be Binyamin and Yosef were, because like you said, two of my closest people to me that I knew that fell, and I was really like trying to understand how I could mourn them and how I could cope with it while I was like not able to mourn. And then I was like thinking about that. Rachel, she really had two boys, Yosef and Binyamin, and the pasuk of Rachel mibakal banea like got a new meaning to it. And that's when like I also wrote a song in Alza about them too and what they meant for me and what I learned from them. But it was just a feeling of there will be a time for this, and right now we have to do what we have to do, and we'll get to that later.
It's interesting to note that I don't know if our listeners realize the fact that the Army itself has a large mental health structure within the military, and there are highly trained professionals that do great work. And then obviously Israeli society has additional layers of support for various mental health related issues related to the war and death and trauma and all these things, and that's all wonderful. And I'm wondering if any of that plays a role in that space that you're talking about, where you realize that, you know, there's going to be a time for this, but not now. Is there any sort of hadracha or advice or resources that the Army gives to soldiers in combat who are trying to get some first level of response?
Well, first of all, commanders sort of learn these kind of things in commander's course and officer's course. You have all these talks and situations where you think of what do you do in a situation like that, and you train to try to be ready for anything. But I think a lot of it is understanding the meaning of what we're doing, and during the mental health stuff, when they're done within and when they're done with all the people who are there, makes it easier for everyone to get through it together. Like a lot of just being together and sort of like group therapy kind of stuff. What they say is also the best way to get through tough times like that. And of course, part of keeping on missions and staying working is what helps you be able to stay capable and keep working and not be able to do things.
That's very interesting. I want to shift to something slightly different, which is the fact that you were in Gaza for a very, very long time, and people around you were being killed. And I'm sure that there were near-death situations, dangerous situations that you and your comrades and your soldiers were in on a maybe regular basis, a daily basis at certain points. And, Chazal tell us that seeing Yom HaMisa and contemplating your own mortality can be an impetus to tshuva. And I'm wondering if you saw anything, not necessarily like tshuva in a classic sense, but people who went through these experiences and gained a fresher, new perspective on life, a renewed motivation or inspiration to prioritize certain things in their life, being in the situation that they were in for so long.
First of all, I think I wouldn't just say Yom HaMita as in like a death situation. I think in general, dangerous situations can put people to thoughts and change people. But I think a lot of the getting ready to go in was a lot of the things you see that all of a sudden people start putting on tefillin and people start like caring more about davening and doing things to be better people. But I think also being in situations where you risk your life, you have to understand why you're doing it. And if you understand why you're doing it, then it's sort of like a circle, because you understand why you're doing it, so you do it. And then when you do it, you're ready to become a better person and have a perspective on life where you see what the important things really are and what's more meaningful and where you care. So that's for sure, you get perspective.
Right. I mean, people talk about the war as being a possible source of, or maybe a certain source of trauma and pain, and it certainly is that. But what you're saying is that it's also at the same time a source of great strength and inspiration for the soldiers who are in it, because they really have to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and it really enforces it over and over again.
Yeah, definitely. I think part of the really hard feelings that you go through, like I said, there's a mix of emotions, but there's definitely also very happy emotions. Just seeing what an amazing nation we have. And I like that a lot of times people say that the younger generation is the smartphone generation. And then like when the stakes are high and what kind of people really are and who people act like. So I was able to see amazing people and amazing 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds that are just like at the beginning of their life and just being amazing people. So that gives a lot of hope also.
That's beautiful. And this is the end of the episode, and we're starting a new year after a really, 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 really rough year. So maybe you can give us one story or anecdote that should leave us with some strength and inspiration going into this new year. Haba Aleinu L'Tova Be'ezrat Hashem.
And actually, right before my wedding, I was supposed to go into Gaza, and I didn't know what was going to be with the wedding and the Knisat Gaza, so I wasn't sure how it would work out. We were supposed to go in and come out like a week after the wedding, and I was very torn because on the one hand, I didn't want to leave my soldiers there without me. On the other hand, I didn't want to definitely not miss my wedding or come late. And I didn't know what the right thing to do is. And I went in and I said, Hashem's going to help. It's going to be okay. And I remember thinking like, it could be there's such a crazy thing to go into Gaza when you're supposed to be getting ready for a wedding. But part of knowing that people had given it all gives me a lot of strength, because I know that people gave it their all, so I could always give more. And when you know that, so you never feel like you've done enough. And like, Baruch Hashem, I got out early even with my soldiers, so I didn't have to like have that kind of debate. I was able to get married. Just gave me a lot of strength thinking that like when you put yourself in a state and you care about on your side, so you'll get good things happen to you back.
Okay, Avram, I would like to publicly thank you for your lengthy and intense service on behalf of Am Yisrael, and I want to wish you a Shana Tova Metuka.
Tova, thank you.